I'm Jenny Brown. Welcome to this week's MFB News. I hope you are all incredibly well. First of all, just to say, really sorry for not being here last week. I totally forgot that I was going away for a few days, so I wouldn't be here to do the video last week. So yeah, apologies for saying I was going to be around and then not. That's not very good, is it? Incidentally, we went to Iceland. For those people who haven't been, I would really recommend it. It is just the most beautiful place I have ever been. Really, really, really incredibly stunning. Also, eye-wateringly expensive. Now, in terms of what we got for you today, we're going to be running through what's the latest with interest rates and lenders. There is some positive news actually starting to come through, thank goodness. Is it life-changing and really exciting? No. Is it a step in the right direction? Yes, absolutely. So we'll go through that in a bit more detail in a moment. I'm going to be talking to you about rental calculations. This is something that I think everybody needs to be getting their heads around what's going on here. And then we're going to be talking about some more positive news in terms of current tenant demand. Okay, so interest rates, what's been happening? So for those of you who are frequent watchers of this video, particularly over the last few months, you will have been very familiar with me talking about swap rates. And swap rates are essentially the fixed rate of interest that people or banks or institutions charge each other when lending each other money. And this is what determines what fixed rates are on the mortgage market. So 1 month ago, we were just kind of recoiling from the mini budget horror. And it was a horror, let's be honest about it. And incidentally, congratulations to Rishi Sunak, who has become Prime Minister since our previous video. It's been a lot of change, hasn't there? But we have actually seen 5-year swap rates ease down from 5.215 1 month ago, and as of 10 o'clock last night, they were at 4.072. So over 1% reduction on 5-year swaps coming down off the boil since the mini budget. And why is this happening? So obviously when the mini budget was announced, we said that we were going to be spending loads and loads of money as a country, yet we had no real way of paying this back, of covering this cost. And there was a massive deficit in terms of the money that we have available to cover this very high level of expenditure. People really panicked. There was a lot of faith lost in our kind of financial stability. The cost of borrowing for the government ratcheted up, and therefore swap rates also jumped up with it. We've now got our new Chancellor in place, Jeremy Hunt. We've got a new Prime Minister, and what we've seen since the mini budget, and particularly since actually the appointment of Jeremy Hunt, swap rates have started easing back down as confidence is starting to be restored in the UK fiscal policies. So actually things are on a really good trajectory. Now what this means in theory is that because the cost of fixed rates has eased down on the money markets, then one would be forgiven for thinking that actually the cost of fixed rates in the mortgage market should be following suit, and actually proportionately so. Are we seeing that at the moment? The very short answer is no. Now we have seen, and you may have even seen in the headlines, mortgage rates start to come down, lenders axing fixed rates, all the kind of sensational stuff that we do expect to see in the press. The reality is that actually on the cold face, we're not seeing this come through just yet. There have been a couple of lenders who have reduced their rates, but actually I think you need to think about this in the context of what were their rates originally. Had they just put their rates right up because they were super busy and trying to slow down business, they've just reduced them to kind of like a slightly more competitive level. But what we're not seeing is every single lender knocking 1.2% off their fixed rates at the moment. Do I think this will happen? I think it will. We will start to see rates start coming down in the coming weeks. But lenders aren't going to rush to do this, because say a lender brings out a new round of lower fixed rates and then something happens in the market and actually swap rates jump back up again, then the lender's going to have to withdraw those rates and reprice. And this has been going on so much. There's been so much of this. Actually, if I'm honest with you, over pretty much since the start of 2022, I think lenders are just saying at the moment, you know what, let's just kind of go for a bit of a period of calm, of stayed kind of pricing. So no one's going to rush to slash rates immediately. They want to kind of get some more surety in terms of what's going to be happening. So in terms of where this leaves pricing, so look, if you were looking at a personal mortgage, 2-year fixed rates are now at 5%, 5-year fixed from 5.1, discounted rates from 3.14, and products with no ERC, so a variable rate with no ERCs, 4.14%. We are seeing a lot of people looking at these types of products at the moment, because what they're saying is actually You know, I'd rather take something with no ERCs, get myself off my lender's standard variable rate, which is currently at 6.5–7%, get my pricing right down, but actually give myself the flexibility to come out of this deal onto a new fixed rate when the time is right. But at the moment, it's just about shaving percentages off of interest rates rather than looking for any kind of long-term solution. So no ERC products, personal loans from 4.14. In the limited company space, a 2-year fixed rates from 5.09, 5-year fixes from 6.04, discounted rates from 3.54, and no ERCs from 4.29%. Now, in terms of the kind of trajectory of travel, so like I say, we are expecting fixed rates to start coming back down again. Now, lenders are always going to prioritise residential mortgages, homeowner mortgages, above buy-to-let mortgages. So if you do see in the news, Santander has slashed their rates, or NatWest, or something like this, there is a very strong chance that they're going to be doing this for homeowner mortgages first and buy-to-let second. So don't just assume that if you see those kinds of headlines, it's applying to buy-to-lets. Things move very, very quickly at the moment. So the advice is actually, once you're ready to have a look for a mortgage, or actually if you even just want to see where the pricing is sitting for your own personal circumstances, just give us a call. We're very, very kind of open here. We don't mind having a chat and just giving you indicative pricing. And if the outcome of that is, I'm not ready to do anything yet, I'm just going to wait and see, that's no problem for us. We would much rather have those conversations with you and kind of keep chipping away at things, and over the coming weeks till we get to a point where you're comfortable, rather than rushing you into making a decision which you might regret. Actually, interestingly, on that point, we've just gone through an exercise on mortgages for business where we've been speaking to all of the lenders that we deal with, and there's many of them, and saying actually if a borrower applies for a mortgage with you on X interest rate now, prior to completion, if your rates then come down, will you allow them to move onto the lower interest rate? And if so, you know, what are the parameters around this? Now, actually, interestingly, a large chunk of lenders will give you the facility to move onto a lower interest rate if it's available pre-completion. Some of them will charge a small administration fee for this, but we are talking, you know, £100, £150. We're not talking thousands. So actually, you know, this could be one way of really hedging your bets, keeping in mind the average sort of time from application to completion is between 4 and 6 months at the moment. Actually, you could apply for a fixed rate mortgage now, know that you've got something in the bag. If things get worse, then you've secured your position now, that's great. But actually, if things get better, you stand to be able to benefit from that as well. So it's worth also, when you're speaking to a broker, ideally us, but if it's a different broker, that's okay. But saying to them, what's this lender's position in terms of giving me a lower rate if their pricing comes down before I complete on my mortgage. Now, the other thing that has been announced is, as I mentioned earlier, that the fiscal statement has been delayed until 17th of November. And this is really on the back of, I guess, giving Jeremy Hunt, Rishi Sunak and co time to really kind of thrash out the direction of travel, what they need to do to get us into a really good position. Now, because of that, and without the clarity that would have come from the financial statement, the Bank of England may now be forced to increase their base rate by a larger increment than expected in their next meeting, because the Bank of England meeting is going to be held before the statement is now announced. So the predictions were that we were going to see a base rate increase of up to 0.75%. So if we're saying that actually things might be higher than that now, then you could be looking at 1 to 1.25% base rate increase in early November. So just really keep that in mind when you're thinking about your mortgage options. But I think the overarching message here is that actually we are starting to see the grassroots of things improving in terms of mortgage pricing, but we're just not quite there yet. But there are things you can do to kind of protect your position, so do give us a call. Okay, rental calculations. Now, this is going to be something that I think is going to cause all of us a bit of a headache going forwards for the foreseeable future. So, just to recap, the rental calculation is the calculation lenders use to determine if a buy-to-let mortgage is affordable. And when they're running this calculation, they are taking into account the level of mortgage interest you're going to be paying, factoring in the kind of fact that you're, in addition to the mortgage interest, you're going to have to pay tax and cover rental voids and repairs to the building and all the rest of it. So making sure that with all these things taken into account, you're going to have enough rent coming in to cover all of your costs. Now, because mortgage interest rates have increased, that's going to eat into your rental income more, which means that essentially your rent has less borrowing power per pound of rent than it had when interest rates were lower. So what we've seen is that lenders have amended their rental calculations to take into account the higher interest rates, and we're now starting to see that there are actually, particularly at higher loan to values and lower yielding properties, there are situations where we simply cannot get to the level of borrowing that people need or want at the moment. Now, one of the bits of news that happened a couple of weeks ago is the Mortgage Works introduced a new higher stress test, which I have to admit made me raise my eyebrows a little bit. What they did was move their stress test from 125% or 145% coverage, assuming an interest rate of circa 5.5%, and they moved it up to 125 or 145% coverage, assuming an interest rate of 8.49. Now, they did, to be fair to them, at the time say this is a temporary measure because we're trying to protect our landlords, our borrowers' positions. We don't want to overlend to people in this period of real volatility. It did feel incredibly cautious, actually, what they'd done. Now, what they've done actually in the last week is they've amended this. So now what they're saying is it's 125 or 145% coverage. And largely speaking, you're going to be looking at an interest rate of, rather than 8.49, more like sort of 7-ish%. So that's kind of brought things right down, which is really, really encouraging. Now, is this a massive game changer? No, because actually 125 or 145% coverage at sort of circa 7% is still very, very high. But it is showing that actually a large lender like the Mortgage Works, who is owned by the Nationwide Building Society, is starting to kind of feel more comfortable about where things are. They've wrapped their head around the situation, got some kind of clarity about where their appetite sits. So actually we can, I think, take this as a really positive thing. Now, in terms of where this leaves us going forward, so I think it's fair to say that rental calculations are complicated at the best of times. When I was saying a moment ago about 125 or 145% coverage, there's different calculations depending on if you own the property personally or in a limited company. If you're borrowing personally, if you're a basic rate taxpayer or a high rate taxpayer, if the mortgage you're doing is simply replacing on a like-for-like basis a mortgage that you've already got, or whether you're additionally raising additional capital, it takes into account the type of properties. So HMOs would have a harsher rental calculation than normal properties. So it's really not very straightforward. And then throw into this the kind of additional layer of higher calculations, more onerous calculations as well, has really kind of exacerbated the situation. So I think the situation is, or the recommendation would be very much, if you are looking for a mortgage, just give us a call, or actually go online and have a look at our website. We've got a mortgage on our quoting system. You can calculate how much you can borrow there as well. But just give us a call and we can kind of run through the parameters. Now, in terms of where this is going to go, so there's kind of a blessing and a curse here, actually. So what lenders tend to do is, largely speaking, for 5-year fixed rate mortgages, they are able to stress the mortgage based on the actual interest rate you're going to pay. So 125% or 145% coverage, assuming the actual interest rate you're taking. So we can kind of work on the basis that if interest rates now start to come off the boil and come down, the rental calculations should ease off. Conversely to this, for non-5-year fixed rate mortgages, the standard calculation has been 125 or 145% coverage, assuming a notional rate of 5.5%. Now, if we see base rate go up, again, we are probably going to see that 5.5% increase. Now, some lenders have already increased it to 6.5%. They may increase it further. So actually, on non-5-year fixed rates, we might actually see the rental calculation get even more onerous than it currently is. So I think the situation is just literally watch this space and we'll keep you updated. And if you do need a mortgage, just give us a call and we can run through the options and do all the maths, because it really isn't very straightforward for you. Okay, now on more positive news, Paragon have run a survey of 730 landlords during August and September, and this has been focused on tenant demand. And reassuringly, a record number, 65% of landlords have reported rising tenant demand over the last 3 months, beating the previous all-time high of 62%, which was recorded in the previous quarter. Now, what Paragon are saying is that 39% of landlords reported that tenant demand had increased significantly, which again is the highest mark for this metric since it was first tracked in 2011. Now, only 1% of landlords felt that tenant demand had decreased slightly, and none said it had decreased significantly, which is a first for this survey, which they've obviously been running for over a decade now. So this is really, really encouraging. And what Paragon is saying is that actually they've seen demand for rental property consistently climbing since the COVID pandemic. Obviously now we're at a point where we're at an all-time high in terms of tenant demand. Now, interestingly on this, so I have a buy-to-let property, which is about to become vacant, and that's a whole other story that I'll bore you with. Thank goodness that we still have Section 21 is all I can say, for now at least. And but what I'm finding is when I'm speaking to the estate agent is that the rental income, to give you some kind of parameters, the rental income that I was able to get on this property when I let it just over a year ago was $1,500 per month. The same sort of property is now letting for $1,950 per month. I'm saying to the letting agent, I'm really worried about getting this property filled. Can we start advertising it early in anticipation of the tenant moving out? And they're saying, look, just don't worry. There is absolutely loads of demand for tenants at the moment. You're not going to have any issues re-letting the property, and also at this higher figure. So I think as a landlord who is facing significantly higher costs, let's be honest about it, actually to hear that, being able to re-let my property should be a relatively straightforward process, and I should be able to command a higher rent than I have done, that's obviously incredibly reassuring, and I'm sure I won't be alone in that fact. And that's everything for me this week. Thank you, as always, for joining us. If you do have any questions about any of the stuff or anything mortgage related at all, actually, do give us a call, 0345 345 6788. Or as I mentioned, we have loads of great stuff on our website, including a mortgage affordability calculator, how much can I borrow based on the rent I'm getting. So by all means, go and have a little nosy around on there. But just look, have a really great weekend, and I will catch you again at the same time next week.